Hello everyone, I'm Corinne, also known as the Discerning Reader, and today I'll be doing a book review of Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend by Matthew Dix. The premise of this book is that this boy, Max, has an imaginary friend named Budo, and the imaginary friend has been alive for 5 years, which is apparently the longest that an imaginary friend can last. I never had an imaginary friend growing up, neither did my dad. I asked him, neither did really most of the people I know. So I took a Twitter poll on my Twitter, and I asked how many people had an imaginary friend growing up, and a surprising number of people said they didn't. I got 27 total responses, and 22 said no, and only 6 said yes. So I think that also speaks a little bit for the believability of this book, where every single child in the entire city has an imaginary friend. I can buy that the protagonist himself has an imaginary friend, because otherwise there'd be no book, but every single child in the entire city has an imaginary friend. This is a psychological fiction book. Normally I wouldn't pick this kind of book up, but the protagonist, I assume this is him on the cover. His name is Max, and he has Asperger's syndrome. And I also have Asperger's syndrome, so I was very intrigued to read this book. I'm not feeling like I'm describing it very well, so I'm just going to read you the blurb. Budo is lucky as imaginary friends go. He's been alive for more than 5 years, which is positively ancient in the world of imaginary friends. But Budo feels his age and thinks constantly of the day when 8-year-old Max Delaney will stop believing in him. When that happens, Budo will disappear. Max is different from other children. Some people say he has Asperger's, but most just say he's on the spectrum. None of this matters to Budo, who loves Max unconditionally and is charged with protecting him from the class bully, from awkward situations in the cafeteria, and even in bathroom stalls. But he can't protect Max from Mrs. Patterson, a teacher in the Learning Center who believes that she alone is qualified to care for this young boy. When Mrs. Patterson does the unthinkable, it is up to Budo and a team of imaginary friends to save Max. And Budo must ultimately decide which is more important, Max's happiness or his own existence. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I would recommend it to anybody who is interested in psychological suspense type stories, or who is interested in reading a book about Asperger's that has a realistic, unique character with a disability. So, as per my usual format, I will do 3 good things and 3 bad things about the book, and I will alternate between them, starting with the bad things so I can finish the video on a good note. Starting with a not-so-good bit, there were 2 characters in this book, one named Mrs. Patterson and one named Mrs. Palmer, and they both had last names starting with P, and it was really hard to keep track of both of them and keep them distinct. I kept mixing them up in my mind. I really wish the author had chosen one of the 25 letters of the alphabet to name one of the 2 teachers, considering that one of them was the antagonist and one of them was a very important helping character. It was really hard to keep them apart. So I really wish the author had picked a different name for one of them so it was easier to tell them apart. And now on to something good about this book. One of the good aspects of this book is that the protagonist, Max, has Asperger's, and it is a very realistic portrayal of it. The fact that he feels claustrophobic when he wears turtlenecks and gloves and things, the fact that he wants to be alone all the time, the fact that he has limited interests, everything about his personality totally matched what it actually is having Asperger's. For me, since I have Asperger's, it was like looking in a mirror and being like, oh, this used to be me like 20 years ago. So it was really interesting and really realistic to that. And okay, now for a bad thing, and this is kind of more like a little bit of a nitpicky aspect. Some things in the story didn't get a proper setup, so when they came to be important in the conclusion, it was like, huh, where did that come from? Some examples of this would be that in the last 50% of the book or so, there was a phrase that kept getting repeated, like the pale devil dancing in the moonlight, I believe. And this would have been really awesome if it had been like an image throughout the entire book. Like, for example, if we see in the beginning of the book that Budo and Max maybe are read a story by their teacher or their mother that is about the pale devil dancing in the moonlight and would seen like where they'd learned it and stuff. And then later on, Budo remembers it and he's like, oh, there's a pale devil. And it would have been really cool, like call back to that. But instead it was just kind of like thrown in there in the last 50%. Like the author hadn't really thought much about how to introduce that in the beginning. Similarly, at one point, Max does something. I don't want to go into too much spoilers here, so I'm just going to talk very generally. At one point, Max does something, and Budo remarks that it's like Rambo, that they'd seen Rambo together this one time, but we didn't actually see them, like, seeing Rambo or whatever. Again, with the devil dancing in the moonlight, I really wish we could have seen this in the beginning of the book, when Max and Budo watch Rambo, and maybe even it could have been characterization, like Max is like, oh, I could never be courageous like Rambo, and Budo's like, just thinks to himself like, but you are every day, you're this brave little kid, which is another thing. He talks about how brave Max is in the last half of the book, but that's not really like a recurring theme in the first half of the book. It felt like between the first and the second half, the author kind of like changed his mind about how he wanted the story to go. The most annoying part of this aspect was that there was a character, Teeny. Again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here. She got introduced in like the last 25% of the book, and she was very instrumental in helping Budo and Max, but we never actually met her in the first like 75%, and I feel like if she was going to be such an important character, why didn't we meet her during the first part of the book and she got set up and everything as this character who could help them? Alright, and now on to a good part of the book. Another good part of the book is Budo, the narrator, who is the imaginary friend of Max. He is a very compelling narrator. His voice is so, it draws you into the story. The author does a very good job of selling the fact that this book is written by this imaginary friend. It really feels real and unique, and the voice in the story is just really enjoyable, and it's really fast to get through. I got there in about 3.5 hours. So yeah, this book is just from cover to cover, just a very enjoyable read, and I really like the voice, especially for the story. Okay, and now finishing up on my last bad aspect. This actually is getting a little bit nitpicky, I guess you could say. This book committed a pet peeve of mine of like telling us information and then only a couple pages later telling us the exact same information in the exact same way. The author did it multiple times, so I assume he like did it on purpose to sort of like sell us on the idea of like this is how this character thinks, and how Budo processes information. But it just really got annoying after a while, and I was just like, come on, we don't need this all the time. So that just kind of like irked me a little bit about this book. But you might not mind that, so this is kind of more of a subjective opinion. My third good bit about this book is that it is actually a very fast read. Again, this might be good, this might be bad, depending. For me, it's a good thing because I can read it fast and then get right to the next book, because I have so many books I want to read at all time. It's a really enjoyable read, start to finish. It's got a really interesting and believable conclusion, and I just really had a fun time reading. It's a fun read. That's what it is. Okay, so that's my thoughts on Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel for more videos and book reviews. Please leave a comment below telling me other books featuring autistic protagonists, or protagonists with disabilities, or neurodiverse protagonists. I'm really interested in that right now. Make sure to share this video with all your friends on social media, and if you'd like to pick up this copy of this book, I will leave a link in the description below where you can get it on Amazon and add it to your Goodreads as well. Alright, I hope to see you in the next video. Bye everyone!